So you are digitally growing trees.
Yeah, so as we were developing our wood prints, because like if it doesn't look like real wood post install, it kind of defeats the purpose.
Yeah.
Like you might get one sale, but you'll lose sales down the line because you didn't hit the mark. So we were looking for ways to differentiate ourselves further, and we knew that the original process for painting steel, which is the same as aluminum, is gravure painting, which is like a giant paint roller, as
Yeah.
you know. And so what you're stuck with is the circumference of the paint roller for your repeat
Yeah.
pattern, which is like 3.3 feet or whatever. So in my travels, I found a mill that can digitally print. And there's other digital printing processes out there, but they're usually pretty cumbersome, like meaning they're really slow. And so when you do something really slow, it makes it expensive. Also, the quality of the paints weren't there, and the quality of the finish wasn't there. So I found this mill that could do it, and they can do it at 100 meters a minute. So the thing's flying, and the quality of their print was really really high.
Yeah.
And after we found the process, let's call it, we said, okay, well, how do we optimize this? How do we take
Yeah. You like
this?
started at the end.
Yeah.
How do we develop these prints?
Yeah, we saw a laser printer like you see in your office printing on steel, and we said, okay, we need to make wood prints out of this. So where we went after that was where, because we're not, at the time we weren't really well nuanced wood print development people. We went and we bought the best Western red cedar we could get our hands on in Alberta, which was like B plus cedar.
Yeah.
And we sanded it and we stained it. Like I actually physically sanded it and stained it, and we took photos of it, and then we took those images and we stitched them together in Photoshop, and we made a wood print, and then we like stitched the whole wood print together end to end, so it was continuous. And we learned a lot of things in that process. Like every time you touch a Photoshop file, it gets too big, or it gets bigger, I should say, and then the file's too big for us to use in our process, and it was really painful. So over the course of a year, we built our first wood print out of these pictures in Photoshop, and what we got was like a C plus, like at best.
Yeah.
There's actually, I have the original panels still like installed in our building, and you can see Photoshop errors and things like that. So we pursued that for another year, and we really refined it. We went to really high resolution digital scans instead of photos, and then we had people who were better at Photoshop than us, like build us wood prints. And then we just tweaked with tone, color, contrast to build our first wood prints in the West Coast Natural Series colorway. But that process in and of itself is really cumbersome, and we wanted something better. We wanted something better just from a developing print standpoint, like as far as time was, and we wanted more variety. What we were stuck with after the first iteration was one wood print that we could kind of change the color on, and it only lent itself to a handful of viable colors, which is actually fawn and hardwood. So then we talked to our team internally, and we found out that like, well, you can do a lot of stuff with computers. We build video games in 3D environments. What's stopping us from building a tree effectively? And so what we started doing is, and it starts with a vector-based noise pattern, as we displace objects in a 3D environment. And this is the technical side I was talking about before that like doesn't really matter.
No, but if you throw enough of these terms at people,
they think you're smart.
Yeah, exactly.
100%. But
That's
like,
the
there's going to
trick.
be one person that watches this and be like, you don't know what you're talking about. And then I have to block them on the Twitter account I don't have. But yeah, and so we built these, we started displacing an object in a 3D environment, and then we built the 3D object, which is the tree. Right, and we grow it, we build it at like the individual strand, like if you could think about like pulling a tree back like a cheese string, that's kind of like we build it by those individual pieces of the cheese string.
That's the image I remember, is seeing at Lux all of these like strands come together to form this tree.
Yeah, and then you're stuck with a tree. Or I shouldn't say you're stuck with a tree, you're left with a tree. And then we take that tree and we cut it as you would in our 3D environment, as you would in a sawmill, and you get different grain patterns depending on how you cut it, which is normal. There's rift sawn, there's quarter sawn. So we do that, and then we have kind of like we have a wood print that you would see. It's a wood print on a piece of paper or on our computer, and it reminds me of the coloring kit that your kid gets at a restaurant, and you have to color it in.
Yeah.
So that's what we have, and then so we're like paint by numbers.
That's how Lux develops their new colors.
Well, that's me trying to dumb it down. You're just left with this thing that you have to paint in, and so then we paint by numbers. We put in the colors on the infinite range of colors that we can create into this wood print to create our wood print, and that's kind of what we have. We have this brown colored piece of wood, and I'm not doing it justice, but that's say, hey, we're going for like a brown tone. That's what we want. And we want different levels of contrast between the grain itself and like let's call it the base color. We play with that. So we started doing this, and we realized that after this was done, because we'd grown it naturally as it were, there was imperfections in
Remember you telling me that, yeah.
Yeah, so if you've ever installed a cedar soffit and you're really trying to do a good job, you'll install panels, but a handful of this natural wood won't really fit with the rest, or it'll be kind of deformed, or maybe green or ugly or whatever. Or you'll have too many knots, so you'll throw it out, and that's what we were getting. So then we would install it in our visualizer, and we would see these boards post-install that didn't look the way that we wanted. So we could just tweak them in the process that I just described, and then make each board, quote unquote perfect.
Yeah.
And perfect is not without blemish. It's just with the right amount of blemishes to give you that look of a natural wood grain. And that's kind of the path that we've been on for the past 4 years. And now we've spit out 7 colors. I'm gonna feel bad if I missed a color. 7 colors in the West Coast Natural Series, maybe 8. And we'd love to add more, but there's just not enough space for.
Yeah, I was gonna ask, do you have more colors coming in that?
We're always developing, but we have nothing imminent as far as colors are concerned. There's a couple that we want to hit, but certain tones are trickier to hit, because doing all the things that we just described is one thing. How a printer prints and then how a printer prints on steel is different. So you kind of have to do your best digitally.
So you can get limitations then from like, I've conceived this pattern in this color, but then the printer can't necessarily do that.
Yeah, and the pattern always comes out exactly the way that we want. It's just the tone. Like looking at a color on a computer and then looking at a color in real life post-print is always different, and we've really brought that close, I would say. But there's always some variance, and printers they don't have an infinite color ink cartridge that they run off. They usually run off like a 4 or 3 color program. It's like magenta, yellow, black, cyan, maybe. Am I right in thinking that? This is the technical stuff that I don't remember, even though I've spent hours in a printing room at steel mills working on this. But yeah, that's it. That's the tweaking process. So there's a couple in the spectrum of colors that we want to hit, but we just haven't been able to get there yet because of time and focusing on other things.
See, look at that.